The IMF's Georgieva urges countries to keep trade as the engine of growth. The Greek parliament allows private sector employees to work up to 13 hours a day. And the Bank of America warns that trade tensions and rising OPEC Plus production could push Brent oil below $50 a barrel. Hello, good evening and welcome to our economic bulletin here at Q News. We start off with global economic news as the International Monetary Fund Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva has urged member countries to keep trade as an engine of growth for the world economy, despite President Trump's steep new tariffs. She noted that with large external surpluses like China, need to rely more on domestic consumption than exports, while countries with big fiscal deficits, like the United States, need to reduce them.
Considerable slowdown in growth, but no recession. 6 months on, where do we stand?
In Europe, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has stated that he would call for the European Union to use Russian assets frozen in the West to provide a €140 billion loan to Ukraine to finance its war effort at the upcoming EU summit. He noted that these funds were to be used exclusively for military equipment and that if paid out in tranches, they would secure Ukraine's military resilience for several years, should that prove necessary. The Office for National Statistics has reported that Britain's economy returned to growth in August when it expanded by a marginal 0.1% from July, offering a little relief to Finance Minister Rachel Reeves as she prepares her November budget. However, gross domestic product in July was revised to show a 0.1% fall from June, having been previously seen as unchanged. In the 3 months to August, growth picked up slightly to 0.3% from 0.2% in the 3 months to July, boosted by public health service work, while consumer-facing services shrank. Staying in Europe, and the Greek Parliament has approved a government bill allowing private sector employees to work up to 13 hours a day for a maximum of 37 days a year, despite worker protests over its potential negative impact amid rising living costs and stagnant wages. The government championed the bill as a measure to make the labour market more flexible and effective, emphasising that it fulfills labour demands and includes protections against dismissal for staff who refuse the extended hours. Labour Minister Nikki Karamios defended the measure, assuring Parliament that the so-called 13-hour clause would not result in every worker being forced into 13-hour shifts daily. Africa now, and the National Bureau of Statistics has reported that Nigeria's headline inflation fell to its lowest level in more than 3 years in September, driven by a moderation in food prices, offering some relief to policymakers battling cost of living pressures. Data showed that the Consumer Price Index dropped to 18.02% year-on-year last month, down from 20.12% in August. Food inflation, which accounts for the bulk of household spending, eased to 16.87% in September from 21.87% the previous month, reflecting improved supply conditions and seasonal harvests. To North America, data from the Canadian Real Estate Association has shown that home sales fell 1.7% in September from August, ending a string of increases that began in April. It noted that sales activity declined in the regions of Greater Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Ottawa, and Montreal, which more than offset gains in the Greater Toronto Area and Winnipeg. However, on an annual basis, without seasonal adjustment, sales were up 5.2%. Latin America now, and Brazil central bank data has shown that economic activity increased less than expected in August, as a growing chorus of economists anticipate a sharper slowdown ahead amid tight monetary policy. The IBC-BR index, seen as a proxy for the gross domestic product, GDP, indicator, was up 0.4% in August from the previous month. It also showed that the index rose 3.2% in the 12 months through August, according to non-seasonally adjusted data. Now, continuing our travel around the world to Oceania, where Reserve Bank of Australia Assistant Governor Christopher Kent has reported that financial conditions are loosening following 3 interest rate cuts this year, with credit readily available to both households and businesses. He noted the RBA's August forecasts were based on market expectations for further policy easing, but acknowledged this outlook was highly uncertain. Kent also downplayed the value of the neutral rate, arguing it is an unsuitable guide for monetary policy given its widely varying estimates from 1% to 4%. Meanwhile, the Australian Bureau of Statistics has revealed that the unemployment rate spiked unexpectedly to a near 4-year high in September as more people went out looking for work, a weak result that revived hopes for more policy easing. Figures showed that net employment rose 40,900 in September from August, when it fell a revised 11,800. That was under market forecasts for a 20,000 gain. Most crucially, the jobless rate jumped to 4.5%, the highest since November 2021, and again, forecast of 4.3%. Now to the MENA region, and the General Authority for Statistics has revealed that Saudi Arabia recorded a slowdown in the annual inflation rate during September 2025, reaching 2.2% compared to 2.3% in August. The decrease in inflation in Saudi Arabia was driven by a slowdown in the growth rate of the housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuels. The authority pointed out that the estimate housing rents item, which represents the largest part of this group, also dropped from 7.4% to 6.5% year-on-year. Conversely, the food and beverages group, which has the highest weight in the index, remained stable at a growth rate of 1.1%. Bank of America has stated that the US-China trade tensions intensify while OPEC Plus production ramps up. Brent prices could slip below $50 a barrel. The bank maintained its Brent forecast at $61 a barrel for the final quarter of 2025 and $64 a barrel for the first half of 2026, citing a likely floor of around $55. It added that looking into 2026, the bank sees U.S. crude oil production flatlining while demand could improve if America moves towards to move forward rather with the trade deals over the coming month. The Ministry of Emergency Management reported that China has recorded 217.5 billion yuan in direct economic losses from natural disasters in the first 9 months of the year. The disasters affected nearly 55 million people nationwide, leading to widespread damage to agriculture, infrastructure and housing. In August alone, natural disasters caused 19.6 billion yuan in losses, impacting over 7.1 million people across 24 provinces. The storms also inflicted serious damage on transportation infrastructure. In a separate report, the Ministry of Transport stated that extreme rainfall caused 16 billion yuan in damage to roadways across 23 provinces. Now, for further analysis on this, we are joined from Hong Kong by the economist Benny Kwok. Thank you very much for being here with us on Q News. What do you think the reported total direct economic losses might be from these natural disasters in the first 9 months of the year? The figure that we're hearing is 217.5 billion yuan. How does this compare to the total disaster relief recorded in last year?
Okay, hello. Thank you for inviting me. So, because of the climate change and because of the infrastructures that is for China is still below the quality than the Europe and even the developed countries, I would say the losses of the natural disasters in China is going to increase in the coming years. And the thing is, what we have to focus is on, of course, not just the flooding. We have to focus on whether the many losses of the crops, because China cannot feed its populations by only its crops, growing its crops. They need to import the food and other natural resources from other parts of the world. So I would say that means that China in the coming years, they still rely on importing crops from, for example, like Argentina, Brazil, and other parts of the world. And China still relies on the global trade. So that's why we're seeing China still also buying time for having a so-called the short-term agreement with the United States and other parts of the world on the global trade, especially the agriculture trade. But at the same time, China is also working hard on growing more food itself, because China needs to feed its growing the population as well.
Yeah, so you're mentioning crops there. Another sector or area of damage is, of course, the road infrastructure, as reported by the Ministry of Transport. Are there likely then going to be an impact, secondary impacts on supply chains, logistic costs, transportation costs, supply chains, and regional trade efficiency generally in affected areas?
Okay. Yes. So we are seeing in the recent you're seeing some flooding. For example, it should be 2 or 3 years about in Zhengzhou. That is doing the direct have the direct effect on the supply chain with the EVs. But of course, China doesn't have any so-called freedom of speech. We really don't know the exact damage. But at the same time, because of the central governance of the central command from the Beijing, China could speed up all kinds of the restructures work in a very short time, because China still relies on the industrial export, whether it is if the restructuring is about to bomb up its economy, it's about the export, it's about regaining the foreign currencies for the government's reserve, then China would speed up it at all costs so that it won't hurt the economy. So yeah.
Okay, and you mentioned crops there. Let's go back to farming. With widespread damage to crops and also farming infrastructure as well, is that going to have quite an effect on food price inflation and also just the agricultural sector's contribution to GDP when it comes to the fourth quarter of the year?
Yes, we are seeing the a little bit increase on the inflation within China, but of course, China is also is doing all kinds of using all kinds of means to try to ensure the inflation is in general is very mild, so that it won't hurt the economy a lot. But at the same time, of course, because of the global agricultural prices is still increasing. That means China is going to putting more subsidies to try to suppress the increase of the price of the crops. So that means China need to borrow much more money. They have to sell more Chinese yuan debt. That means that China is going to their financial deficit problem is going to getting more serious as well.
Now, nearly 55 million people have been affected by natural disasters so far this year. And will that damage to housing and infrastructure have a major effect on household savings and insurance payouts and how much consumers are going to be spending?
Okay, so many of the damages in China, so-called about the natural disasters, is mainly concentrated on those so-called the middle or lower income areas. That is, Beijing could have incentive to try to just ignore it because it is not that economic important. So I would say China, yes, we're seeing more natural disasters in the future because of the climate change, and China could ignore them or relatively ignore them because unlike the United States and unlike the other democratic countries, China could ignore part of the populations. Of course, they still look at the economy as well. But if those people or if those regions are not that economically important, China could simply ignore them because they have no freedom of speech, they have no freedom of expressions, and in other parts of the world we don't exactly know what it happens now. And if it does not affect the industrial productions, it does not affect the global supply chain, then nobody would care.
We had the isolated 19.6 billion yuan in economic loss during August itself, supposedly affecting more than 7.1 million people. How does this demonstrate the month-to-month volatility when it comes to the economy, especially at risk from these extreme weather events, as you say, which will no doubt increase with climate change?
But of course, at the same time, China is also building its technology, is also investing a lot of money on its science and technology on detecting the weather, detecting the earthquake, flooding, others as well. But of course, it is to try to compete with the United States in terms of the technology level, and also, of course, it is to try to export its technology to other parts of the world. So, of course, I would say, yeah, China would improve its science and technology on detecting the natural disaster in the coming years. But at the same time, the climate change, the speed of the climate change, always faster than the improvement of technology as well. So you will see the improvement of the technology, but at the same time you will see more natural disasters.
Indeed,
natural disasters in China cannot be curbed easily.
Well, we'll look forward to speaking to you next time and catching up on how things are going from Hong Kong. That was the economist Benny Kwok. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now back to our economic news, and staying in Asia, Malaysian Ministry of Energy Transition announced that the Southeast Asian regional bloc has endorsed an action plan to increase the share of renewable electricity to 45% of total capacity over the next 5 years as part of its energy transition efforts. The 2026-2030 SEN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation was endorsed by member states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations during a meeting of energy ministers. The plan also includes a target to boost efficiency by cutting the amount of energy consumed per unit of economic growth, known as energy intensity, by 40% from the 2005 level. Energy Ministry official Eddie Wibowo has revealed that Indonesia, the world's largest palm oil producer, is considering a plan to require international flights from Jakarta and Bali to use a 1% sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, blend starting from 2026. Wibowo noted that the regulation for the gradual implementation of SAF, or SAF, is currently being drafted with a proposal that it will be started in 2026 with an initial implementation of 1%. Under the proposed regulation, Indonesia will seek to gradually increase the SAF blend to 5% by 2035. Now, oil prices were stable today as traders prepared for a potential halt to India's Russian oil imports, which could reshape flows and boost demand for supplies from elsewhere. Brent crude futures were up 0.5% to $62.23 a barrel, whereas U.S. West Texas Intermediate futures were up 0.3% to $58.47 a barrel. Both contracts on Wednesday touched the lowest since early May on U.S.-China trade tensions and concern about a looming supply glut. Gold hit a record high for the fourth straight session today as investors flocked to the safe haven metal on brewing U.S.-China trade tensions and the U.S. government shutdown, with bets on interest rate cuts fueling the momentum. Spot gold was up 1.4% at $4,264.63 per ounce after bullion touched a record high of $4,270.59 earlier. U.S. gold futures for December delivery were up 1.9% at $4,279.50. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has stated that the 2-week-old federal government shutdown may cost the U.S. economy up to $15 billion a week. Bessent warned that the shutdown was starting to cut into muscle of the U.S. economy. He urged Democrats to be heroes and side with Republicans to end it.
Muscle here. We believe that the shutdown may start costing the U.S. economy up to $15 billion a day, and this is a decision the Democrats are making.
Thank you.
The Federal Reserve's latest Beige Book report noted that U.S. economic activity and employment were little changed overall, but revealed concerning signs of weakness. Most districts reported increased layoffs due to weaker demand, economic uncertainty, and new AI investments. This sluggishness was confirmed by a nationwide dip in consumption, especially retail goods, with 5 of the 12 regions reporting lower consumer spending as middle and lower income households pulled back. Furthermore, the report highlighted that tariff-induced input costs were rising across many districts. though the extent to which these costs were being passed on to consumers varied. US President Donald Trump has stated that the United States is in a trade war with China, adding that the country is currently in a situation where it has a 100% tariff. He claimed that without tariffs, the country would be exposed as a nothing and would have no defense. Trump pointed out that other countries have used tariffs against the United States, but previously no one in the presidency felt the need to implement them, which he suggested allowed the U.S. to accumulate $37 trillion in debt. He emphasized that tariffs are a very important tool for U.S. defense and national security, concluding that without tariffs, the country would lack national security.
And they've allowed us to be $37 trillion in debt, et cetera, et cetera. Tariffs are a very important tool.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has stated that it is not clear whether China's recent restrictions on exports of rare earth minerals represent a split politically inside its trade negotiating team, but that he doesn't believe Beijing wants to be an agent of chaos. He noted that Washington did not want to escalate a trade conflict with China, stressing that Trump is ready to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea later this month. Bessent added that officials from both countries were in touch daily to set up the meeting, and Washington did not want to decouple from the second largest economy in the world.
Going to let a group of bureaucrats in Beijing try to manage the global supply chains through disappointing actions and through economic.
The Chinese Commerce Ministry has stated that it is strongly dissatisfied with a series of U.S. actions and firmly opposes them when asked about President Trump's threat of 100% tariffs on Chinese exports to the U.S. The ministry spokeswoman also highlighted that U.S. interpretations of China's rare earth export controls grossly distorted facts and caused unnecessary panic, defending its measures as a legitimate practice to refine the export control system. She added that the U.S. side has adopted a negative attitude and insisted on implementing the restrictions. Consequently, China has to take countermeasures.
坚决反对何方泛化国家安全。
我们已经就稀土出口管制政策多次阐明了立场。中方依法对相关物项实施出口管制，目的是更好地维护世界和平与地区稳定，履行防扩散等国际义务。这也符合国际惯例。我们愿同各国加强出口管制的对话交流，维护全球产供链的安全稳定。
The Financial Stability Board has issued a warning about significant gaps in global efforts to regulate the rapidly expanding crypto market, raising concerns about potential harm to financial stability. The FSB found that while some progress exists, the current international implementation and coordination of rules are too fragmented, inconsistent, and insufficient to manage the global nature of crypto assets. Although the risks to financial stability are currently limited, the FSB assessed they are now rising, given that the value of the global crypto market has doubled to $4 trillion over the last year. And that almost brings us to the end of our economic bulletin, but let's check out what we've been covering this half hour. IMF's Georgieva urges countries to keep trade as the engine of growth. The Greek parliament allows private sector employees to work up to 13 hours a day. And Bank of America warns that trade tensions and rising OPEC Plus production could push Brent oil below $50 a barrel. And that's our economic bulletin for this hour. But don't forget, you can follow us on our social media platforms at Qnews EGY to stay informed. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more here on Q News.